All right, let's go. You wanted this cite, right? You wanted me to cite this work. You wanted me to cite the peer work. You wanted me to cite the reviews and the peer reviews. So here we go. The archaeological history of the Hoxie Farm site, documented as 11CK4, and its intersection with the Bishop Ford Expressway, formerly called Calumet Expressway, and the Ninth Ward is documented through major salvage projects conducted by the Illinois State Archaeological Survey, that's called the ISAS, and the Field Museum of Natural History. So when you're walking into the Field Museum of Natural History, those are our Amerindian ancestors. All right, so the disheartening information. If we get into the core peer-reviewed reports and publications, they are the primary body of work on this information on this particular Hoxie site is contained within the, look it up, research it on your own, the ISAS research reports. You don't believe me? Which provide detailed analysis of the fortified village and main occupation area, which is called the MOA. The first archaeologist is D.K. Jackson and T.E. Emerson did research in the year 2014 through 2017, and that research states. Now, sometimes when I do the research, I'm like, okay, I'm digging up something. It's going to make some people mad. Well, guess what? That's what you do in college. They got them researching and turning in thesis papers to prove that they are doctorate degrees, or they have they're excellent at researching and gathering the information and presenting all of the details and digging and finding out whether it's the truth or something to debunk something or to support it. That's what research does. That's what it does. And so in 2014 and 2017, somebody's family members or peers are doing the research. So why can't we? Why do we have to feel as if doing this research is forbidden when everybody's doing it? Now let's get into what Emerson and Jackson had to say. Now, in their research titled The Hoxie Farm Site Fortified Village, Late Fisher Phase Occupation and Fortification in South Chicago, it is documented in the ISAS Research Reports number 27, and this volume documents the exposure of a large, densely populated 14th century village surrounded by defensive fortifications. 14th century means the 1300s. Next peer review, D.K. Jackson, the year 2017. The Hoxie Farm Site main occupation area, Lake Fisher and Hoover phase components in South Chicago, documented in the ISAS Research Report number 40. This report details the artifact rich midden deposits and 1,509 prehistoric features found in the northern portion of the site. Then there is researcher T.E. Emerson, who submitted research between 2005 and again in 2010. His title is A Reassessment of Upper Mississippian Habitations and Chronology. This work synthesized legal collections from early 1900s digs, that it would be the 1800s, including the WPA era work to define ethnic differentiation and violent confrontation at the site. Now we have the evidence of remains and the citations for that, the fire pits, and the conflict. Now, for the salvage excavations of 1953, led by researchers Elaine Bloom and David Wener, Wener, of the Field Museum. This project was a direct response to the highway's imminent construction, and they take it over as an eminent domain. They identified 56 pit features, 16 of which were classified as fire pits, containing, again, ash and carbonized material. Then we have the bioarchaeological analysis, which is studies by Hedman and Hargrave, which highlight nearly 70 documented burials. Their peer-reviewed poster, which is the title Hoxie Farm Bioarchaeological or Bioarchaeology of a Late Prehistoric Community, which notes skeletal evidence for violent death and post-mortem modification of human elements, including burning and cut marks. Then we have citations for the artifact record, which means that the research identifies Hoxie Farm as yielding the largest collection of copper-based metal artifacts, almost 270 in the Chicago area, including ceremonial items like the 9-inch copper serpent effigy. Then we have the citations for the infrastructure impact in the dump site. Now, the highway construction at I-80 and I-94 interchange has a technical report from the ISAS, which confirms that large-scale investigations in year 2001 and 2003 were prompted by a joint IDOT, which is Illinois Department of Transportation, and ISTHA, I don't know what that is, project to expand the interchange. Let's find out. ISTH project. Give me 1 second so I can get that for you. And that way we're not in the dark. It is the Illinois Tollway or Highway. Okay. Alright, so that's where that research was coming from. And it was actually the work that they needed to do on the highway construction regarding the impact of the dump site. And the interchange would have been the I-94, which is the Bishop Ford, and the I-80 that goes what? East and west. I-80 goes all the way through Indiana, goes all the way through, heading west, all the way through western Illinois, going into Iowa. I'm not sure if it takes you to Canada, to California, which would have been Route 66 that actually did that. Straight shot from the East Coast to the West Coast. For some reason, Route 66 has been shut down. And it was a prominent Indian trail. Now we have the loss of the mounds under peer review. Now, while historical accounts from the 1800s recorded dozens of mounds in the Calumet-St. Louis corridor, St. Louis, what? That's where the Indians ran to be with their other relatives that didn't go to the reservations or to, Oklahoma? St. Louis. That's where your Indians are. From Cairo, Illinois, that's where your Indians are. Illinois Indians, Indiana, the Algonquin Indians, that's where they are. So instead of the swamps of North Carolina, there you were, St. Louis. All right. So now most outside of protected areas were plowed over. Let me reread that again. The loss of mounds, While historical accounts from the 1800s recorded dozens of mounds in the Calumet-St. Louis corridor, most outside of protected areas, like your forest preserves, were plowed over or incantantly destroyed by urban development and highway paths. Intentionally just rolled over those mounds. Didn't respect the burials, didn't respect the people, didn't respect the remains. All they see is money and greed. But Yahuwah, Shalom. Oh, Yahuwah. Alright, so let's do some citing for the Allodial Gardens legacy. While primary archaeological focus remained on the Fisher-Hubbard phases, contemporary public archaeology in the 9th Ward, in other words, Bronzeville and Calumet projects, that means the 9th Ward is by the outside suburbs at like 120 something. Bronzeville is your 2000s, 3000s, which means what? They're trying to say that there are mounds there as well, which means that King Drive, Calumet, Indiana Street, all of that in Bronzeville, 43rd, 47th, all of that is rolled over, paved over Indian mounds. The Allodial Gardens legacy, while primary archaeological focus remained on the Fisher-Hubbard phases, because that's just two different civilization areas, right? Or their phases. Contemporary public archaeology in the 9th Ward, specifically the Allodial Gardens legacy, in other words, Bronzeville and Calumet projects, increasingly explores how 20th century development erased these landscapes through landfills and road beds. Landfills. Glory be to Yah. Now, keep in mind that there is specific skeletal data regarding the violent trauma mentioned in the bioarchaeological reports. There's also lists of the exact 1950s engineering plans for the Calumet Expressway expansion. They are available. Now I'm going to go over again and sum up the evidence that I was able to provide. Now, the archaeological evidence from the Hoxie Farm site, 11CK4, and the historical planning of the Bishop Ford Expressway confirm a period of significant prehistoric conflict and a mid-20th century destruction of indigenous landscapes. I'm going to try to connect all of the states that I mentioned and more to come with the frequency of the American Indians and how the areas, especially the Bishop Ford lease to Cahokia, down to Florida, and to all of the main energy systems, the frequencies of it, and why building over that stops the frequency. Right? 1. The bioarchaeological data, which is the trauma and the burning. Peer-reviewed analysis by Hedman, HEDMAN, and Hargrove of the nearly 70 burials found at the site provides specific evidence of a dynamic cultural environment marked by violence. Doesn't mean that everything they did was all violence. That's just what they documented. Alright? Then we have the lethal trauma. which is the skeletal remains which showed clear evidence of violent death, including unhealed fractures and blunt force trauma. We have the post-mortem modification, which is the isolated human elements which were found with cut marks suggestive of scalping or disarticulation and incised designs. Then we have the burning patterns. The forensic examination identified differential burning on remains, suggesting bodies were occasionally burned in high-temperature ritualistic manners or as a result of village-wide conflict. Then we have mass graves, similar to findings at Cahokia, Mound 72. The remains at the Hoxie farm site reflected a society managing high levels of external and internal stress. Then we have the 1950s engineering and excavation plans. The construction of the Calumet Expressway, now the Bishop Ford, was a primary driver for the destruction of these mounds and settlements. The 1950 salvage project, conducted by Elaine Blum and David Weiner of the Field Museum, states that this was an emergency excavation. It was a direct response to the highway's path through the prehistoric village. The Barrel Pit design, which was to create the elevated road beds for the I-80, I-94 interchange. Engineers designed the site to serve as a massive extraction zone. Contractors removed the top layers of soil containing archaeological features and remains to use as bedding material for the expressway. Then the 9th Ward in Allodial Gardens, the Allodial Gardens development, which was 1944 through 1945, and subsequent industrial landfills were part of a broader planning effort that effectively paved over the remaining mounds, centers, and indigenous footprints of the Lake Calumet region. There's 1950 maps to find all of this. Now, as I research further, it is to determine if there was more than 70 bodies, or the land mass could have been 100 acres times 70 burial, sites. Now, if we look at a darker systemic history involving the Allodial Gardens 9th Ward area, one that intersects with modern industrial waste, the toxic donut, and the literal desecration of indigenous and perhaps more recent remains. While official archaeological reports, like those from Jackson in year 2014 and Hetman in year 2009, they focused on these 70 plus prehistorical burial sites recovered during the highway salvage. There is a separate, harrowing narrative involving the landfills and dump sites surrounding Allodial Gardens. Let's go. Now, the burning dump site and the Bishop Ford. For decades, the area south of the Bishop Ford was used as a dumping ground for the city's industrial and residential waste. The 130 street landfills located, or the locations like the CID landfill and the Paxton landfills surrounded the 9th Ward. Records from environmental activists, notably Hazel Johnson, deemed the mother of environmental justice, describes constant fires at these sites. The disturbance of mounds. Residents and local historians have long maintained that when the Bishop Ford was expanded and the burrow pits like Wampum Lake were dug, the machinery tore through vastly more than 70 bodies that they definitely know of. Then we have systemic erasure. Because this was the 9th ward in Allodial Gardens, the protection of these sites were often ignored. There are accounts of cremains and skeletal fragments being churned up by industrial equipment and processed or burned along with the urban refuse for over half a century. And I smelled that long. So can you imagine those that smelled it and they lived there all those years? Because there's blacks that lived there because they were traveling back and forth to their parents and family members worked at the steel mills in Indiana and what is that? The East Illinois right there. Let's get into the frequency. Remember I told you about the frequency. I'm going to blow your mind with this. Now the frequency and energy of the land. I brought up the Cahokia frequency because I wanted to know what the connection was between the mounds and the culture of the tribes on that trail in that Calumet area. And let me keep this in mind. When you go over there to Avenue O, those are the biggest races over there back in the 70s. And how do you get those type of people, right? Because those are they create sundown towns. Those sundown towns are created to keep certain people from coming back to land masses that they took from them or tricked from them. So they need the worst people, the meanest people, the most evilest people, the people that can take your life and don't care nothing about it, laugh about it, talk about it, smile about it afterwards, and then do not serve no time. That's how your sundown towns are created. So that the Indian could not go back to his land and take the land. We're not talking about Native Americans. We're talking about Indians that kept fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting and did not mind dying for the land. So we're going to get into the frequency and energy of the land. The Cahokia frequency. Now, in indigenous belief systems, the disturbance and burning of ancestors is seen as a profound rupture of the land's energy. Now, how would they know that if the bodies are burned? That's why we don't do cremation, people. We're not supposed to do cremation. Is innate. So in order for them to burn through these mounds, this land, it comes from the logistics, right? What are your Indian beliefs? Those agencies or those agents or the agency system agents, they learned it from the Amerindians of all those tribes. So when they report that back and they have to, then they come and they buy land, they have to discuss with the government agencies like the Indian Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Department of Transportation. They have to discuss these grounds every time. And they found out that the disturbance and burning of ancestors, indigenous ancestors, is seen as profound rupture of the land's energy. Remember, this is about frequency and energy of the land. So to pave over those mounds, to pave over the burial sites, to pave over the entire cultures, to take over the bodies, to use the body as medical research every time someone enters a medical or doctor's program. It ruptures the land's energy. What are we connected to? The land. Right? We're connected to the land. So that frequency has been broken. Let's get into the spiritual stagnation when the rupture of the land's energy takes place. Many believe that the toxic nature of the Ninth Ward, talking about in Chicago, isn't just chemical, but spiritual, caused by the uninterrupted burning and paving over of sacred mounds, centers, and burial sites. A lot of things take place over there 127 in Allodial. That's hard living. The expressway, driving, it's like driving on a plate of ice and oil at the same time. Ice, oil, sleet, and rain at the same time, making the environmental conditions toxic. Let's get into the 70-year timeline. Now, from the construction of Allodial in the 40s through the expressway booms of the 50s and 60s, and the landfill operations that lasted into the 2000s, the land was essentially treated as a sacrifice zone. All right, people.
Welcome to my podcast. It's a window to the past of history, ancestry, and genealogy, not